Okay, so here we go with our next chapter of Stephen King's It. This is going to be my blind review. And I don't really have a number for this chapter because it's just called Derry, the First Interlude. And this is really cool because in this chapter we get to hear from Mike Hanlon finally. Mike is the one who made all 6 of the phone calls from the previous chapter, 6 phone calls. And Mike Hanlon is still living in Derry, and he's become a librarian, and we get a little bit of a backtrack here because we find out what set this whole process in motion, the process of him finally getting all the numbers together and calling everybody. So Mike Hanlon remained in Derry, and he was a librarian, and he started noticing that the events were starting up again, and it looked like he needed to give everyone a call because they agreed that if the events ever started up again, they would all come back to Derry. So we find out in this chapter that George Denbrough was I had to remember his last name, sorry. George Denbrough was the first of the murders that took place. The first of the things that took place. It was, some of them were murders, some of them were disappearances, some of them were tragedies. George Denbrough was the first that took place in 57, and that started this whole process of them sort of confronting this evil, whatever it is. And we find out through this chapter that about every 27 years in Derry, every 26 to 27 years, the evil starts again. Something starts happening that leads to a lot of people disappearing or dying, and it comes in various forms. It comes, like I said, in the form of tragedies. It comes in the form of murders and disappearances and things like that. And it's interesting because it's almost like a spy mystery in this one of those old sort of Sherlock Holmes type stories, because he's going around and he's talking to people and just figuring things out, and his old friend who's a librarian who's a lot older than him tells him to just leave it alone, just beware, because he thinks he's getting involved in things he shouldn't get involved in. So that was really cool. It was a different direction for this, to kind of go in that mystery sort of direction, because I thought from the last chapter we were going to get more of just what it's like when they all come back together. But no, we got to backtrack a little bit. It's cool to see this all set out sort of as a timeline that you get. What else? The turtle thing. Interesting thing with the turtle. He says something about the turtle talked, and the turtle couldn't help us. So we get that again. We get the whole thing with the pipes and the sewers. At one point we hear something about a little girl that disappeared, and the wife talked about something coming up from the sink in their house. This is before their daughter disappeared. They're voices of some sort, like a chorus of voices. And she asks, "Who are you?" And they say stuff like, "We are Legion," and that's kind of calling back to some possession type stuff, but that's what they say, I guess. So that happens before their daughter disappears, and then afterward, the dad thinks he hears, after he gets done washing the dishes, the sound of his daughter's voice coming up from the pipe, or from the sink. So there's something to do there with the sewers and the pipes and stuff like that. And something about a turtle. I don't know what that is, but I'm sure I'll find out. But it's really cool to see those things being affirmed again. We find out in this chapter that the murder of the guy named Mellon in the second chapter is actually what started the process of Mike realizing that this might have started again, and also the timeline thing. The chapter sort of ends with him saying that he really hopes he doesn't have to call them, but we know that he did, just from the other chapters. And it's cool to see him reflect back on people and his impressions of them, because with those 6 phone calls, we got to know each of those characters, and now we're getting Mike's recollection of them. So that was pretty cool. I also wanted to add that it said in this chapter that Mike thought that the other people might not remember these events at all, and he says something about he thinks they might not remember because he's the only one who stayed in Derry. So maybe something about the distance makes them actually forget what happened. So again, not really sure what's going on with them forgetting, but that's a tiny little clue that it might have something to do with his actual presence in that town. So, I don't know. Mysterious. I guess I'll find out later. Okay, so just as a tiny little thing that doesn't really have a number, but just as a chapter that's here as information and kind of how this process started after hearing from all the other people, I think that was a really, really smart a really smart way to write that. And I'm excited for the next chapter, because again, this next chapter says something about Derry in 1958, so I'm hoping we're going to go back in time and see some of that stuff, but we might not. It might be just them talking again. But I enjoyed this chapter. It wasn't quite as chilling or disturbing as the other ones. I think it was because rather than being sort of in that first person where we're hearing about things for the first time in real time with those people, it's very much it's really much from the perspective of someone reading news articles and sort of piecing it all together. I think the creepiest part is just him talking to the older guy, and the older guy telling him to beware and that he shouldn't be involved in these things. And people in this town, they know things and they're not talking because they don't want to talk. I think it's because they don't want to believe what's going on. And that's sort of how you would expect it to be. Oh, we also find out that one of the things that happened, I think in 1930, because that would be 27 years before the George Denbrough thing, that was when some sort of building, I think for African Americans, because it was called the Black Spot, it was something where they congregated, and it was burned down by some sort of white supremacist group. So again, sort of hitting on the prejudice and the bigotry narrative again in this book, which seems to play an integral role. So, okay. I forgot to mention this too. I think it says from reading the transcripts in the courtroom, he thought that the clown might have been back, so maybe someone said something in the courtroom that they hadn't planned on, because I know that they were trying to keep that narrative out of the courtroom. The police officers were trying to keep it out of there. But maybe someone said something that made it slip. Or maybe he just knew this because of the nature of the murder. So that was a little bit unclear. But anyway, that was cool. I like this chapter. I'm excited to see what happens next. I'm excited to see what's going on with the turtle. And that's cool. Oh, and we get, I know I keep adding little extra things here. We get a little more of an insight into the scene where they sort of all stand together and pledge to make a promise to come back if this ever starts again, because they're all sort of standing in a circle as kids, and they cut their palms and they join hands and they make this promise. So we get more insight into that and just sort of going back over some things that we've heard before in more detail. So I'm hoping that they'll do that more in the future, and that we're going to go back and hear even more about what happened back in the 50s. That's my review of Derry, the First Interlude. I had to look at the title. I apologize. If you like this video, be sure to like this video, and be sure to subscribe, because I will be making more of this content in addition to other things. Have a great day, and thanks.